thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, Unlocking the Essentials of IEC62304 for Medical Devices. I am Audrey Markham. I am a Strategic Partner Manager for Inflectra, and I'm excited to introduce Vlad, who is at Inmarsys, one of our partners. He's a Director and Safety Critical Software Consultant at Inmarsys. And he has extensive experience in the safety critical areas like medical, automotive, and aerospace. And I'm also here with my colleague, Dr. Shriram Rajagopalan, who is Inflectra's Global Lead on Training and Agile Transformation. And in today's webinar, we're going to be taking a deeper look into what IEC62304 is, why it's essential for selling medical devices, and main principles for guiding successful medical software development, and a ton more as well. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Vlad.
Right, so let's talk about 6304. This is the first presentation in series, and in this presentation, on this webinar, we'll talk about the fundamentals of 6304. So we're not going to be deep dive into the standard itself because it's very lengthy. If I try to do it, we'll probably need to book room for like about 8 hours at least. But for this presentation, just outline what is 6304 and how is it applicable to medical devices and what is the basic process of it. So let's start with it. So this is our agenda for today. First, we'll talk about introduction. So I explain what 6304 is. Why do we need this? What is it for? And who is it for? A quick word about Inmarsys. We are based in Northampton, United Kingdom, not the American Northampton. So we got lots of experience in development of medical devices, MDs, and individual diagnostic devices, IVDs. And this is a picture of Northampton Council with an old bus. Unfortunately, we don't really have any more of these, so they're all very modern. But it's still a nice place. And I've been based in Northampton for the last 20 years or so. So our area of expertise is integration of software development lifecycle, SDLC, and together with QMS, developing software for various clients, perform remediation activities, and do production integration. So here are my contact details. So if you got a question or you would like to have a consultation, please give me a call or send me an email, and I'll try to respond as soon as I can. Now, let's talk about 6304 now, so about interesting topics. So this is the standard which is defining the software development lifecycle for medical devices. It's not applicable for aerospace, automotive, or anything specific for medical. Now, it's telling you how you need to develop your software, how you need to design it, what activities you need to perform during your process. And main things about it are traceability, risk management, and defect tracking. So that's very important. Note that it doesn't quite involved in cybersecurity, which is the next big thing. There is another standard about this. I will talk about it slightly later. And it's covering all the software items which are going to be forming part of your software system. The standard itself is very concise and straight to the point. It's really easy to read, unlike some other standards. And the approach it takes is very much do it as we telling you to do. So please follow it. Now, with all that, all said, the standard itself is not mandatory. It is harmonized by European Union FDA and the UK, obviously, but it's not mandatory. So if you can prove that your process is better or equivalent to 6304, you can follow that. But you cannot do certification on 6304 on its own. You can only do it as part of 13485, ISO 13485 certification. There's only one notified body which can do such certification. It's TUV. Nobody else offers that for whatever reason. Why do we need this? As I said, it's not mandatory, but it's really good practice, considered to be a good practice to follow this standard. because FDA refers some electronic standard like 60601 refer to it, and the MDD and MDR European Union standards, they do refer to the standard. So, and medical industry, as you know, is really audited, regulated and audited. So you can have all sorts of audits, including unannounced ones. And unannounced audit, if you never heard about this term, is when someone knocking on the door say, right, now we have, you're going to be audited at the moment. So please stand out, okay, go away from your computers. We're going to check what you're doing, how you're doing. And it can take a day or two. So it's quite a stressful event, but it can happen, and the notified bodies can do this any moment. So during audit or during your submission, you need to demonstrate that all your development process is actually correct, and you developing software to known quality. So these things are very important for medical devices, because we all want to have devices which are safe and basically doing what they're supposed to do to our patients. Now, when people work in R&D, the big question is whether they shall adopt standard 6304 straight away, or they can postpone it until some moment. The one way to look at it is to split the R&D to R is research and D as development. Once you're in research phase, it doesn't apply. The 6304 or any other standards really doesn't apply. So when you're creating your prototype or you're doing your proof of concept, so it's okay to not have this standard in mind. It's better if you do, because then we will be able to reuse some of the software used in the feasibility study, using prototypes in your final device, but standard doesn't really apply to that phase. So you can do whatever you want. You can use whatever language you want, whatever coding style, whatever software, whatever soup, anything, as long as you're on the R side. You don't have to perform any testing at all. But once you switch into the D side, which is a formal development, you must follow the process. And the process is really well defined. It's audited, so you got lots of documents to write, you got lots of rules to follow, and lots of activities to perform. Another question is, which frequently comes up, is, say, electronics engineers or mechanics engineers, does it really regulate in them? No, it's not. It's only, this standard is specific for software and software test departments. No other departments are involved. So they have in the electronic side, they have other standards like 60601 or 61010. On the mechanical side, they have their own standards, but this specific standard is for software developers only. So, as I said, it's only applicable for software design for medical devices or instruments, sometimes they're called. And you need to basically use this standard to define your development process from the very beginning to the very end. So also another thing which you need to be mindful of is how you're selecting your tools for your software development, or how you're selecting the soup or COTS. If you're not familiar with these acronyms, at the end of the presentation, there is a big table explaining what they are. But generally, SOUP is software of unknown provenance, and COTS is the same thing in FDA's lingo. So it means commercial off the shelf. It doesn't really have to be commercial, but it's something of something acquired from different source, or basically in engineering speak, it's not invented here. So not software being designed as part of this project. It could be well designed as part of some other department in the company, but not for this specific purpose. Other disciplines are not quite involved. So IT, for example, they're not part of 6304, although there are some document and some tools management, configuration items management, which IT will be involved, but the guidance of software department. There are several other standards, the IEC62304 interface into, and we'll be talking about it in a minute. So that's basically it. And the purpose of it is to accelerate the certification, the submission for the device, and placement on the market. So it is here on the presentation, I'm talking about 510K, but not necessarily. It can be de novo as well. It all depends on basically how you position your device, whether any predicament to the device or not. So these are the standards the 60304 is interfacing to. As you can see, there are quite a few. You can divide them into several groups. So big one is the QMS, Quality Management System, 13485, and that is the main standard any company operates in. So any medical company operates in. So if you're not certified to 13485, you cannot sell a medical device or medical software, because you may be developing your software as a medical device rather than physical device, something we can actually hold. Then there are a big chunk of requirements coming from risk standards, risk management standards, and these are ISO 14971 with the cornerstone of all this. Then there is a 24971, which is, again, guidance on how to apply it. And there is another 8002-1, which is specific for medical software application to the ISO 14971 to medical environment. So it basically tells you how easy to read the 14971, how easy to follow, because if you need two other standards explaining you how to do it. On the electrical side, you have the 60601, and there's also 61010. Depends on the applicability of your device, whether it's a lab device or whether it's IVD or MD. You have usability standard, which is 62366, which is talking about how the user is going to be interacting with the device, what kind of limitations and what kind of functionality you need to implement for the medical device. But this is where the foreseeable use and misuse coming from as well. The relatively new standard in this group is cybersecurity. So there are lots of standards on cybersecurity field for medical devices. This is one of the simply the most comprehensive one, although some people probably disagree. It's 8100151, and that one is all about the cybersecurity. It's a very interesting standard. If I'm not mistaken, it's been adopted by EU on May this year. And then there is a MDR and IVDR. So they're not specifically different from MDD and IVD, the previous standards, except there is a new requirement is to implement UDI, Universal Device Identification. So that's something to be mindful of. And then we have two standards describing the software development lifecycle. It's 62304, which is including the physical device, and 82304, which is very similar, except this one is specific for software as medical device. Now, there's lots of confusion of what software as medical device is. Some people think that if you have firmware, you have, say, something on PC, which is connected to device, it's part of the software system, it's 8304. It's not quite, but basically the simplest way to distinguish between the two is if your medical device got physical presence, then it's 6304. If it's not, it's 8304. So if you're developing just an app and this is the only thing you're developing, then it's 8304. If you got anything physical, it's 6304. So that's probably the simplest way to look at it, although there could be some exceptions, but generally that's how it is. Now, this is the formal development process in 6304. This is the so-called V model. We'll talk about it in a couple of minutes in more details. But generally, that area here is outside of scope of 6304. So you must have some sort of activities by the systems team, which they create in the customer needs, they create in the system requirements, product requirements, and then they have their own the risk management at the system level, and so all sorts of activities at the system level. Now, in this presentation, we won't be talking about those. but we'll concentrate on the software development activities. So we start from the software development planning. We analyze requirements based on the system requirements, basically what the system team want us to implement. We implement them. We try to design the architectural design, create and then detailed design, software unit implementation going down to the lowest level. And then we perform the integration testing and software system testing. Remember, software system is not the same as a system, as a whole thing. It's specifically for software system. And then we do software release. In parallel, we perform software risk management, because that's, for example, how you determine your software class. Again, we'll be talking about software classes today. And we do software configuration management and software problem resolution. In Spira team speak, it's called incident. Some other systems called defect and or items, problems, whatever they want to call it. But I tend to call it incident in line with Inflectra's guidelines. That is the V model, kind of simplified view of this. So it's called V model because this is like V, letter V. So on left-hand side, you have software activities. On the right-hand side, you get software test activities. So when you hear software test engineer saying, oh, I don't know, I'm on the right-hand side, that what means that they are on different side of the V and they're not directly involved in the software development activities. Likewise, if software engineer says, I'm on the left-hand side, so don't talk to me about this, it means they are on the development side, they're not familiar with the test activities on the right-hand side. So if you look at the V, it's very much waterfall-like. So we have software development planning, requirement analysis, architecture, design, implementation, and release to test. And the same thing you got on the software test side, the planning the test activities, the analyzing the requirements, which means they always involved in the requirements analysis at any moment. So it's very important because software testers, they need to be able to test, to run the verification activities, and 60304 says you must verify all your requirements. So they need to be able to test it. And if a requirement is vague or ambiguous, they won't be able to create a test case for it. So then they will be looking at the software architecture, and they do integration, verification planning, and verification testing. They will design the test cases, they will implement them, and then once they got release, formal release, they will start doing the software verification activities. That's in a nutshell the V. Now, one of the questions, again, frequently asked, is the standard itself seems to be like a waterfall. Can we use Agile? Yes, you can. So it's a good practice to have a big set of requirements at the very beginning, and then you can split them into the small sprints, implementing those requirements, let's say 2-week sprints, and then you go into another sprint, thus implementing the whole thing. So the 60304 tells you what needs to be done. It doesn't really tell you how exactly you shall organize your teams or how you shall perform your development process. So yes, you can use Agile principles, and sometimes it can be integrated with the Agile principle on the test side, sometimes not, because the velocities of both teams can be different. So it's really up to software manager, the person who is taking the decisions on how to develop and how to design sprints and so on. One big thing which is here, right in the middle, it's called independence. 60304, there used to be, in the early editions of 60304, used to be a principle of independence, which means that the software team shall be free from any, say, pressure from the software development team. It has been removed. It's no longer there, but it's a very good principle to basically to work under, because if your software test team, if they're free to do whatever they want, the test software, and not be afraid, oh, we found a bug, so software release cannot go, what do we do? Now we are the problem in the company, so we're going to be blamed for everything. It's an issue. So the important bit is to have your software test team to be basically allowed to do their job, not to apply pressure onto them. That's a very important bit to remember. So the main principles of 6.304 is basically don't start writing your code straight away, because you need to do lots of pre-coding activities. For example, you need to do your requirements, you need to analyze your requirements, create software requirements. You need to figure out what exactly you're going to be building. You need to read what the customer actually wants, because again, system level requirements sometimes can be a big ambiguous, and you really need to understand the concept of what exactly the company wants. You need to analyze your user requirements, and by user requirements, it's a very ambiguous term as well. So I tend to split user requirements and user interface requirements. So in my view, user requirements are requirements to the user. For example, who your user base is. So who your users are, the physical properties. For example, if they're colorblind, can you still use colors extensively in your software design? Or if there's a certain height, or so they can be tall, can be short, so you need to be able to arrange your user interface such way that they can do it. If it's really heavy, if your final device is really heavy, you need to be able, so users need to be able to operate with it. It should be repairable, should be testable in the production side. Technicians should be able to access certain features, and it will go into your software requirements. For example, the technician interface. So lots of things to be considering here. And then you also have the user interface, and these things will come from the foreseeable use and misuse, not to mention abuse. And because all sorts of users can do different things. They can make mistakes when they're pressing the wrong button, or they trying to be a bit malicious, or it's difficult. We're working with people here, so things can happen. So misuse is very much, you can put it as don't put your cat into microwave, and abuse is don't smash your microwave with a hammer. So you can picture it like that. What can possibly go wrong? One of the big things of the medical development lifecycle is risk management, and 6.304 is talking a lot about it, but it doesn't really have the proper process for it. So it's referring to 4971, and that is normally the process the entire company operates under. And then you need to think how you're going to be partitioning your software, how you'll be building your software system. Is it going to be just one item, or is it going to be lots of items? How you partition your architecture, what's going to be the interface between them, so integration, how you're going to be releasing them. Is your code quality good enough? How are you going to be planning your coding activities? So coding standard, how are you going to be doing your code reviews? What kind of tools are going to be using? So, for example, some of the companies prefer to use pre-validated tools, like certain compilers which come with the functional safety certificate. Some other companies prefer to pay less because these certificates are really expensive, and they buy cheaper tools or go with the free tools, and then validating the tools themselves, basically spending money on test activities and the requirements activities for those tools. And then you have the traceability, which is, again, really important. You should be able to trace your requirements all the way down to the test. And that's where Spira team is quite useful, because you can build this traceability matrix at a click, just one button click. And this is actually how I started to use Spira team even before I became Inflectra's partner. Then you have the 6.304 traceability. So we talked about it. And you have basically project level requirement at the very top. That is produced by the software, by the systems team. Then you have, for example, in this example, you have two software items. One is software A, you have requirements, tests, issues, incidents. Same thing you got on the B side. The incidents can be different, the tests probably be different. Some of the tests could be the same, but generally that's how the flow goes. So each requirement must be traceable and testable. So I just keep repeating myself, but it's a really important bit. So you must be able to test it, and you must be able to trace it. So one of the things to remember that not all project level requirements are going to be traced into software. For example, if they have limitations on the production labeling, that's not quite going into software packaging. Or say altitude at which device shall operate is not much software can do. Well, sometimes it can, like putting a sensor and checking the air pressure, but generally it's not really used. But so be aware that you won't be able to cover 100% of requirements, project level requirements in your software. It's highly unlikely you will be. So there are other disciplines which will be doing it. That's obviously unless your product is software only, in which case it's a different story. Software classes, that is an interesting topic. So there are three software classes in 60304, A, B, and C, where A being the lowest, the C being the highest, or the serious injury of death, or death can be caused by your device in class C, and not particularly problematic injury or no injury at all at class A, and B is in between. So for FDA, it used to be the same up until, I think, 2023, when they implemented they replaced the software level of concern, which used to be minor, moderate, and major, again, 3 levels. They replaced it with documentation level, which is basic is generally class A, roughly class A, enhanced is roughly class B or class C. I put here basic enhanced to the class B. It can be either. So you really need to look into the FDA classification when you're doing your software class. Need to look at the guidance, and then you'll figure out whether it's basic or enhanced for class B. But class C is definitely enhanced. And these are not the same as device classes. So that's very simple. It's 60304 classes. It's your software classes, not the device classes. Risk management, the typical answer, what can possibly go wrong? That's all developers are always asking this, and their answer is everything. So that's why we need to do risk analysis. And at the very beginning, 60304 will tell you, so before software is written, that software, the probability of risk occurring because of software is going to be 100%. So they don't trust you to write software correctly. So then you identify the software causes, you define hazards, you figure out what harm it can cause, but that activity will probably be also involving QA people and risk management people. Sometimes the same person, sometimes different, but lots of, it depends on the company structure. So you'll be really working closely with QA and risk management teams when you're creating your software risk analysis. Then you're analyzing your severities, analyzing probabilities of hazard situation occurring, detectability, and then you do your mitigation. Now, if you look at 14971, you'll see there is no mention of detectability, but if you're looking at the 8002-1, you will see that you can apply detectability, because it's very difficult to mitigate anything in software without being able to detect the problem. So in some devices I developed for class C, the fault detection takes probably about 50% of the code. So a device, most of the time, device just detecting all the sorts of potential problems. Then I think there is a question: is a defect considered as a risk? It depends. So it depends if it's really a risk. So it depends what kind of defect. It can be producing risk. So for example, if your software crashes and that's a defect, so it completely stops, and your product is insulin pump, then you may kill a patient in the process. So you need to think about it. And actually, one of the potential software causes which can cause risk issues in 8002-1 is precisely that. One of the things I wanted to ask you, so I wanted to do a short quiz on this. So let's picture a scenario. We have a thermometer here, so nice thermometer, which is measuring the body temperature. What do you think the software class is going to be for this device? Answers in the chat, I guess.
Chat, or I can make a quick poll for it.
Okay.
But how about we just do the chat for now?
Okay, we'll give
So class C. We got a class C, class B.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give 15 more seconds and then I'll give you the answer, right?
Oh, it seems to be divided, 2 on class B, 2 on class C.
Someone said depends what you are using the temperature to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So time's up. So those who answered depends actually correct. So there is such thing called IFU, instructions for use. And these instructions for use, they outline the intended use of the thermometer. So if you are, for example, going to a supermarket and buying this thermometer, it's highly likely the instructions for use will say it's not to be trusted. So if you have any concerns, please refer to medical professional. So then it can be class A. So because you've been warned, it's not a diagnostic tool. So if you have any concerns, you need to speak to a medical person. If, say, your GP or a medical professional using this device, it can be class B because they'll be basing the diagnosis on, but still responsibility on this is going to be with the medical professional. Responsibility of the diagnostics, the result of diagnosis is going to be with medical professional. If this thermometer is so sophisticated, it can be measure temperature and immediately give you a diagnostic information, say you got a flu, then it can be class C. Again, unless the IFU will say it's for use by medical professionals only and responsibility for the diagnosis lies with medical professional. So it's all pretty much in the instructions for use and intended use of the device. But it may well be the same device, but the software is going to be fundamentally different and the process is going to be fundamentally different for these classes. So thank you very much for all those who participated. Right, so architecture. So once you go into the architecture design, you need to think how you're going to be partitioning your system. So you have the software items, you have the software units, you have software systems as well. So you need to be able to partition, have at least at the very beginning, you have probably not the complete architecture, so architecture will evolve. So, but you have rough understanding of how the system should be working. So, for example, if you have a medical device which is, I don't know, sampling, doing the lateral flow reader, for example, or blood glucose meter. So they'll probably have some sort of microcontroller which will run firmware, and you have this as a software item. Then this blood glucose meter is connected to, say, PC software for to display analysis. That's going to be different software item. Still can be part of the same software system. And that's going to be different. So that's the architecture will be like you have two things in there. So that's how you partition the system. Then you're analyzing the potential costs. So I know software guys normally not looking into costs, but they need to be aligned. So because otherwise they will put the most powerful microcontroller they can find in the market, whereas in reality they only need something really cheap and small memory and like MSP430, which only costs a couple of cents, rather than putting something which costs $10. They also need to look at the time allowed for the development, and they need to look at the team composition. So what kind of skill set people they have, so inside of the team. Because if they, for example, only get people who know C, then they probably need to look at the architecture around that sort of language and what they can use and tools what they can use. So if you only have Python and they need to build an embedded device, then basically they'll have an issue. So we need to look at something more powerful, microcontroller and so on. So that's basically how you design your architecture. The important bit is to remember is not over-engineer, because most of the medical devices are designed to a cost. So you don't really need to put all the bells and whistles in the first release. Just design MVP, minimum viable product, and go there to the market. Because otherwise, what will happen? You can promise your investors, you can promise the market all sorts of things, which are going to be the fantastic, but it will take you to design 3 years to design. By which time your competitors came to the market with MVP, doing roughly the same thing as you do. Okay, less. It's less nice, less beautiful, but they on the market and you'll be late. So that's important to remember. The architecture must be testable. So if they cannot test the design, if testers cannot verify the design, it's bad. So please ensure that your design is traced to the requirements and it really answers the requirements. And then once you're doing the architecture, you also need to involve different teams. For example, as I said, when you select a microcontroller, you need to be mindful of what electronics team can put on the board. The same thing with mechanical engineers. So if you put huge micro on the board, which really doesn't fit in a tiny blood glucose meter, then we got an issue. So that's why you need to be in constant discussion with other teams. Couple of words about testing. So test life cycle is very simple. As I said, they need to create test plans rather, because they have lots of different plans. The V&V plan for the overall system, the integration plan, the software item test plan. They need to review requirements. It's very good practice to invite them to all requirements discussion meeting, because it will be instant response, whether they can test it or not. Then they create the test cases, they review test cases, they dry run them to verify that the test case is actually correct, because it's a very typical situation in lots of companies. Your software doesn't work. No, it's your test is bad. So that sort of cats and dogs situation, it's better to avoid it. So that's why they doing dry runs. They do peer reviews. Normally 2 testers in the company, at least 2 testers. One is the creating a test case, another one is reviewing it. Then they run in the test readiness assessment, which is not strictly speaking required by the standard, but it's a good practice to have. It's basically a checklist. Can they do the formal testing? Do they have all the hardware? Do they have all the software? Do they have all the documentation in place? So is everything there to enable them to run smoothly through the process rather than get stumbling at every single step? And then they create test report and then they repeat, because the work never ends. So they restart with each new release. Documents. Now, everyone has documents. Unfortunately, 62304 is a very document-heavy standard. So typical software item project will have 40 to 60 documents need to be written. Some of them can be auto-generated. Some of them need to be written by hand. But generally, at the very least, you have to have plans, the build plan, the development plan, software configuration management plan, maintenance plan, risk management plan, and so on. You have to have protocols. The protocols are, again, those depends on your actual software, on your product implementation. So, for example, if you have 2 different software items, that somehow they need to communicate with each other. So create a document describing the protocol, communication protocol between the 2. And then you have the traceability or the software configuration item registry, hazards list, software summary, that's FDA document, and or software description as they call it now, and you do test documentation. So it's really document heavy standard. So and as said, at any given moment there could be an audit, and depending on what stage you are in terms of ISO 13485, auditors will probably ask for these documents to view. So, and sometimes they can ask for really pretty much everything. In one of the audits, I've been asked to show the audit trail for the entire project, which was running for 2 years. Who did what, when, and how. The document, generated document was about 2,500 pages. So what's next? So we're now done with this first part of the presentation. The second part is going to be very much like show and tell, and we'll be using the SpiraPlan. So in there, I'll create the medical system project. It's going to be imaginary device, blood glucose meter with advanced communication capabilities like Bluetooth. We'll have Bluetooth printer connectivity, Wi-Fi, screen, and so on. And we'll walk over the project structure itself. I'll show you how I do requirements, how the tasks associated with requirements and releases, how tests are created, how it's all traceable, and generate the traceability matrix in the end. So that is the plan. So if you're interested, please join the second part of this presentation. I'm sure Audrey will post the invite for all of you. These ones, I'm not going to read it. I'm sure you know most of them acronyms. So and this presentation can be available for you to review as part of the webinar. So please take a look, and if you're not familiar with these acronyms, please read it. That's really it. So now it's question time. Unless you want to jump in and add something.
No, I think it was very nicely done, Vlad. You know, I know this is a very heavily loaded, information, and so you really did a very nice job in trying to, package it and bring it down to, basics, nuts and bolts. So really appreciate that. Lots of good takeaways. So let's hear from the others in terms of the questions and stuff like that.
One of the questions I'm seeing here is FDA 510K. Does it apply globally? What's the equivalent of this in Europe?
Right. So FDA 510K is the US only. Now, there are certain countries which will accept it. As I believe in Middle East, they will accept it as for their own purposes, but I'm not really an authority on that. In Europe, we have MDR and IVDR. So there was a pretty much really long saga on how they introduced it. So they introduced it a long time ago, like I think 3 or 4 years ago. But the notified bodies weren't ready, so they extended the use of IVDD and MDD, and then they so IVDD is in vitro diagnostics directive, and MDD is medical device directive. And then they had to extend it several times, and I think now it's actually coming now to become IVDR and MDR be involved. UK is still stuck with the so-called UKCA after Brexit, so it's a CE marking process. So it's very much similar to IVDD and MDD. But I'm not a regulatory person, so I'm a software guy. So if in doubt, I'll suggest you to get in touch with regulatory people. But generally, that's how it is. So FDA is US only, and some markets can accept it.
Awesome. Vlad, I'm here seeing the second question that made me really, smile, but I'm going to let you answer that question.
Okay.
So there is a ISO 14971 standard, and there is a guidance on how to use the 14971 standard.
Yes.
So can you, elaborate on why we need 24971 when we have 14971?
Well, there are two additional standards on how to use 14971. So my view on 14971 might not be shared with some medical professionals, some medical development professionals, but when I was reading it, it was very much reminiscent to me as if you old enough like me, you remember the NTSC and the SICAM and PAL. Yeah. And there was a joke that SICAM was designed specifically not to be the same as American standards. So some of the people even joked about it, said it's system essentially contrary to American methods. So that's what SECAM stands for. Not really, but it was a joke. So 4971, they did a great job to say we are not FMEA. And lots of developers, they used to FMEA or FTA ways of doing things. And because they came from different backgrounds, from automotive, aerospace, from oil and gas industries, and that's where it's normally used. So and that's why pretty much everyone is struggling with 4971. And that's why they implemented the additional guidances on this, 24971 is pretty much for everything, but 8002-1 is specific for software, how to use it. And if you look at it, there is a famous table B2, which is also mentioned in the 6304, basically say, that's how you do it.
That's how you do it.
That's why, but so it's very difficult to standard to read as well. So unlike 6304, which is very clear and concise, but well, risk management people also need to earn money, right?
Yep.
So
Cool. Yep, we'll go to Audrey for the next one.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a question from John. How do acceptance criteria play into requirements and test case expected results? Do you recommend they be included in software requirement reports?
Yeah, it's a good question, to which I really don't have a direct answer. I wouldn't be including it into requirements. So my normally when I'm writing the requirements, I'm making my effort to make requirements as short and concise as possible, not to include the acceptance criteria. Some people, however, prefer to include it. So there's no right or wrong of doing this. Yes, you can include the acceptance criteria, but the important bit is when they come into test, they either use their own acceptance criteria the way they read the requirement, by they I mean the test team, or they can use the acceptance criteria from the requirement and align it with how they think the requirement shall work. So yes, it will help them probably, but you can also create on some of the requirements. I include like note to testers how I think they should be testing it. It's mostly when it comes to the hardware. When it says that GPIO line needs to be going up and down at this frequency, and I said to test it, probably need to use oscilloscope to measure with the specific frequency and see if it operates correctly. So it's very much, it will help them definitely, but some test managers they ignoring those. It's really difficult.
Shram, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I had a thought. So this is one of the reasons why you come with that it depends kind of an answer. So if you go back to the class A, class B, class C kind of thing, if your product increment, whether you are using waterfall or plan-driven approaches or adaptive approaches, if your increment is just going to be okay, we have released a new update and that's pretty much it. No problem. Acceptance reports could be optional. But if it's going to be very critical, where there is a life or death kind of a situation that may emanate from the decision that is basically done from this particular software that you are releasing, then you are not only looking at testing, but you are also looking at performance qualification, operational qualification, installation qualification. We call them as PQ, OQ, and IQ. And so there's a lot more to this than should I just include acceptance criteria and just release it, or depending upon the decision that is going to be made based upon the increment that you are releasing. The answer is it depends there. So I just want to call that thought process.
Yeah, I would probably add to this. Thank you, Siran, by the way. So I would add to this that it's actually a very interesting discussion, probably worth like another chat on this. But it's a good practice to have it at the system level. So I would definitely recommend using the system level. At the software level, probably less so. So I would leave it to the verification team. But at the system level, it's good thing to have, because your audience is very diverse. So when you have software, so if you got software requirements, you know that the consumers of them requirements are going to be software developers who very much familiar with the way requirements are written, how the system shall operate, and software test engineers who, again, they're familiar, they're within this area. But when you're writing it for the system level, then your team is very diverse. So you have QA, you have many mechanical people, you have electronics people, you have scientists, you have algorithm people. So all sorts of different people who not necessarily have the view or understanding of how the entire system should work. Even the production people are going to be consumers of some requirements as well. So, and they need to understand. So I think in this scenario, in the system level, it's quite good idea to have it as acceptance criteria. At the software level, not so much. That's my view.
Yep, I think that's a good thought process here. So there are more questions coming. So Vlad, so I'm going to move on to the next one, but appreciate that. This is from Mark. His question is IEC62304 considered to be quote state-of-the-art standard? And does it generally rule over or overrule other software standards for medical devices? Example, general principles of software validation, final guidance for industry and FDA staff.
IEC62304 is basically accepted by FDA as a state-of-the-art standard. So you can use that.
You can use that. Cool.
So it's a very well-known standard, and very much every single medical company using this to develop software, because it's one of the simplest ones to implement, and it's very unambiguous. Whereas some other guidances are a bit more difficult to implement, because, for example, even with the language they choose, for example, in the FDA speak, recommended means a must. So, which is not quite the how English is basically existing.
Yeah.
So, do requirements? I think there's a question from Andrew.
Mhm.
Do requirements have to be defined before development begins, or can you focus on the end result with its defined requirements and passing test case? Generally, you need to be able to know what exactly you're building. If you don't know what your product is or what your software product is, then you shouldn't be in design stage. So my view is that at least system level requirements has to be defined before you start writing your software. So they might not be perfect. So you can always change your requirements as you go along. So and obviously it will have impact on all the rest of the requirements and system, but you can always revise it. And typically they are revised. So for a variety of reasons, during COVID, for example, lots of companies changed the requirements, electronics requirements, system level requirements, because they realized they cannot get parts. So for the medical devices, they had to redesign a big chunk of the product, and so they had to change requirements, had to change even biochemistry. They had to change because they couldn't get the right chemistry. So yes, I would suggest to write system level requirements at the beginning. When it comes to software level requirements, try to write them at least at the minimum level. So you have a vision of your interfaces, of your basic capabilities, what the device shall do. You may not be able to go at the very low level, because I tend to write requirements at a really low level, to a level of to turn on this light, the software shall trigger this GPIO up or down. So very much putting a big chunk of the design inside of the requirement. Some people like it, some people don't. Again, it's subjective, but at least something which will allow the creation of the system. That's, I'm not sure if you answered the question, but Suram?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to clarify here is, or share my thoughts over here is, sometimes people get hung up on words like requirements, test cases, or testing, and all those kinds of things. I would like to roll back a few steps and ask this question, like, look at it from a quality standpoint. It doesn't matter whether you have great requirements and all the test cases, everything is looking very clear, but the fitness for use is not there. So quality is not just conformance to requirements, but it's also fitness for use. What's the point of having a thermometer, whether it is class A, class B, class C, doesn't matter, which category that we are going to classify that under. What's the point in having a thermometer that nobody can physically hold, that it constantly keeps slipping? It worked great, but it's nobody is able to hold it, very clearly. And so its fitness for purpose is gone. So I do want to, based upon some of the experience in having designed software that is used as a medical device, not software in medical device, but software as a medical device, there are two differences. So based upon those kinds of things, I always come back and say, okay, what's the fitness for use over here? And when you look at the fitness for use, you are not looking at software requirements alone. You are going back to the system level requirements. You are looking at how this will be used in the market and different types of targeted persona and stuff like that. And so from that angle, I would say it is always good to have requirements really clearly understood, because garbage in, garbage out. At the end of the day, if you don't have clear requirements, I would have designed everything correct. I would have, tested everything right. I developed everything right, but it's useless. So I think start from the quality angle and who is going to use it and how it is meeting that fitness for purpose, fitness for use kind of considerations. If that is thought through, then you will think through whether it is test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, behavior-driven development, hypothesis-driven development, risk-driven development, whatever thought process that you are applying, you will start with the right artifact to move forward to meet those considerations. That's my thought process.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Good. I think we are to the mark here, so I'll probably give it.
Yes.
Sorry for closing.
Yeah, that was perfect timing. Thank you all for your questions, and kind of this conversation at the end, I think, was really interesting. And thanks again, Vlad and Shriram, for putting this presentation together.
Thanks, Vlad.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.